Well, it's been nearly 8 months since Elden Ring tweeted out that their expansion, Shadow of the Erdtree, was in development, and when they said that we could expect news further down the line, they weren't kidding. It's been almost a year with no news or update of their expansion. So in this Elden Ring video, I wanted to talk with you guys a bit about when we might see more from Elden Ring, when we might see some actual footage or a trailer or gameplay, when we might find out something about the release date, and kind of get into those details. We haven't had a discussion about this for a very, very long time. And of course, I would love to hear your guys' feedback about this as well. So make sure you leave a comment and let me know what your guys' thoughts are when you think we'll see something, what you've heard, or what you think is going to happen based on, Elden Ring and From Software's previous track record. So to date, all we really had is a couple of tweets on Twitter kind of explaining that Shadow of the Erdtree is in development. There was a screenshot posted, kind of shows what appears to be the Erdtree in distress in the background with potentially Mikla in the foreground. A lot of speculation about, what that tree is and who this character is. Obviously, that's been going on for a long time. But there's not a lot of details about what the content of this expansion is going to entail. And while we might not know a lot about the content, I think it's safe to predict that this expansion is going to be quite large. We are essentially at 20 months since the release of Elden Ring, if you can believe that. And if the expansion comes out sometime in the next 2 to 4 months, which is, could happen, might not happen, I don't know. But if it happens in that window, we're talking about 2 years since the first release of Elden Ring for its first expansion to come out. One would have to assume that the reason that it's taking so long is because there's a lot to it, right? There's a good size of landscape. There are either new mechanics, new weapons, new boss designs, etc. There has to be something that's keeping the production of this game or this expansion from releasing at a faster pace, and one can assume that it's simply the sheer size of it. I think another prediction that's kind of safe to make about this as well is probably that Shadow of the Erdtree will probably be the only expansion for Elden Ring. I think at the rate they're going for their expansions, if they decided to make another one and it had to be similar in terms of scope and size as the first one, you'd be looking at another 1 to 2 years of development, at which point, you're really looking at, if there's a sequel to this game, that's kind of the release window for that. So I think it's probably safe to say that Shadow of the Erdtree will likely be the only expansion for Elden Ring before we probably move into a sequel or the next From Software game, whatever that is. So this course brings us to, okay, if the game is coming out sometime next year at this point, I think it's probably safe to say that the game is not coming out in the next 2 months. We haven't seen any CGI, we haven't seen any gameplay, there's been no announcements from Software, Bandai Namco about Shadow of the Erdtree. I think it would be completely strange for them to go into the holiday season, announce something, and just release it. I mean, they do strange things from time to time, so it's not like impossible that might happen. But I think usually, the way they've done it, they make an announcement, then they show something a little bit later on, then they usually show like a CGI trailer, then they usually show like a gameplay trailer with a release date, and then usually a few months after that or something, like the game comes out. So I think it's safe to say at this point that the Elden Ring expansion, Shadow of the Erdtree, is not going to come out this year. So if we're talking about release windows for next year, and we've kind of ruled out this year, which I think is probably the most likely scenario, I think a lot of people could predict it's probably going to be Q1, and it'll try and be like February or March. A lot of their releases tend to be in that range. I think that's because if you're From Software, you're probably trying to launch this before the end of the fiscal year. The fiscal year in Japan ends at the end of March, so all the sales and profits from that expansion would be on this year's tally, essentially, if they could get it out before then. So I think if you're From Software, you're probably targeting a February, March launch if possible, but I also could see it potentially slipping into April, May, June as well if they can't hit that target. If you're looking at timelines of like when we're going to see stuff for this, I think the next most likely place is probably the Game Awards in December. I would not be surprised to see some sort of CGI trailer or gameplay trailer at that point, or some mix of the two. From Software has obviously paired up with Jeff Keighley a lot, so I think we could see this happening at that event. And if you get like a CGI trailer at that point, then you're probably getting a gameplay trailer another month or two away from that, and then you're probably getting a release date of a couple months after that, or 3 months or so after that. So I think if that's the trend, you're probably looking at the tail end of March, maybe early April. But if you get a gameplay trailer at the Game Awards with a release date, then I think it could be sooner in the February window. Now, obviously, if we don't see anything at the Game Awards and it comes and goes and there's no Elden Ring news before the end of the year, I don't know what that means for next year. I think that would mean that we're likely not going to see Shadow of the Erdtree until summer, which is also possible. So I think keeping an eye on the Game Awards is probably the best thing to do if you're really interested in, when this expansion might come out. And there are other considerations for next year as well. If From Software, obviously, and Bandai Namco wanted to take them into consideration, which since Elden Ring is such a huge title, I'm not sure they have to, but that's generally like what other games are releasing in the same window. Typically, you don't want to launch your title in the middle of a bunch of other games that are going to be similar competitors. I'm not sure Elden Ring has to worry about that as much. They probably have to worry more about Elden Ring. But if you're just looking at titles that are coming out in the like Q1, Q2 area that might compete against them, really all that's coming out is like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which is the second part of the remake for Final Fantasy VII coming out at the very end of February. So I'm not sure that's really a problem for them. I think maybe you could extrapolate that they don't want to release it on February 29th, which is when Rebirth comes out. But, there's a couple weeks before that, plenty of weeks after that. I don't think even if they released it on the same exact day, it would matter. I don't think these are exactly the same audiences anyway. And really, the only other title I can think of that would compete against Elden Ring for player base is Black Myth Wukong, which comes out sometime next year with no release date exactly confirmed yet. But I can't imagine that Elden Ring would be afraid to launch in that window, whenever that is. I mean, they don't even have an announced release date, so I can't see that affecting when they would. Even if they knew when it was, I think Elden Ring is obviously much larger of the two, so Black Myth is more likely to push their release date around Elden Ring than the other way around. So that kind of wraps up everything we know. I think I've given some good logic to, the release date of Elden Ring, and I think, it's very likely that we'll probably see something before the end of the year, particularly if this game is coming out or this expansion is coming out in Q1. If we don't hear anything by the end of the year, I'd be extremely shocked. And obviously, if we don't, that's going to push the release date of Shadow of the Erdtree back, in my opinion, because I can't imagine them just making an announcement and dropping it. Now, they could. It's not impossible. But if we don't hear something by the end of the year, I think it's likely that we're looking at summer for Shadow of the Erdtree, though I think it makes a lot more sense for it to launch in Q1. So what do you guys think? What do you guys make of all the leaks and everything I saw a couple weeks ago? People were publishing about that. What do you guys think the release date's going to be? Let me know in the comments below.